All statements and opinions expressed by guests of the Adult in the Room podcast are strictly their own and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs or opinions of the host, producers, or advertisers. All interviews are presented in their most complete possible form in the interests of free speech. No statements should be interpreted as financial, legal, or medical advice. Listener and viewer discretion are strongly advised.
It's the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. That's me. Welcome to the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. Boy, Mike McCormick and I have talked quite a few times on this podcast and related to each other what's the other one's feeling about any given news topic. And of course, the Pope's death has really come to the fore. And he's just written another book this time about the connection between the Obama administration and the Vatican. How interesting is that? And it reminded me of something that one of my colleagues over at PJ Media wrote. And Robert Spencer called Pope Francis, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis, the Barack Obama of the papacy. I thought you'd get a kick out of that, Mike McCormick. But Mike's book is An Almost Insurmountable Evil, How Obama's Deep State Defiled the Catholic Church and Executed the Wuhan Plandemic. I mean, everything. Wow. He's also written two other books, as I mentioned. One of them, the case to impeach and imprison Joe Biden, of which there was plenty on the Hunter Biden laptop, which he wrote about at his Substack, which is Midnight in the Laptop of Good and Evil. And 15 Years of Deplorable, a White House memoir. And he's got that on Kindle. He was the White House stenographer. They literally have stenographers. See, you always thought that the White House news media, the press corps that has their little offices and their cubbies at the White House, you thought they were the stenographers. Well, they are, but Mike really was. He wrote down everything that several presidents said. I believe he came in the Bush administration, and then eventually he was in the Obama administration, and he followed around Joe Biden a lot. So if you want to talk about someone who observed problems of cognition in Joe Biden and the different things that they did, the Biden family did to make money, you can't talk to someone any better than Mike McCormick. And Mike, welcome back to the Adult in the Room podcast. How are you? And how is this book going?
Hey, thanks, Victoria. Thanks for having me back. And the book's going really well. I mean, well, let me put it this way. The book takes down two criminal presidents and a corrupt pope, and the corrupt pope just died. And I talk about five people in the book. Three of them are White House affiliated, two of them are Vatican affiliated. The two Vatican affiliated people both died within the last month. So there's a lot going on right around the topic of this book. And the book basically looks at what the White House, Obama-Biden White House, did with the Vatican starting through this defrocked Cardinal McCarrick, who was a really terribly evil man. I think he was a CIA operative, actually, who helped influence the Vatican's election of Pope Francis in 2013. And then Pope Francis became an operative for the Obama-Biden people. And now we have, as I stumbled across the information that I found in White House visitor logs, I published the book in February of this year. So it's only been out about 3 months. And all of a sudden, the Pope and the Cardinal, the evil Cardinal and the Pope are both gone. God's will be done, I believe.
I was apathetic when I heard that Pope Francis had died because I recognized the fact that he's just not been on, I don't believe, God's side during his 12 years of the papacy. And I just wanted to read you a couple more excerpts from what Robert had mentioned in his story about the Pope. He writes about all things religion. And Pope Francis was the first Pope, he writes, at least in modern times, to put the answer to the old question, is the Pope Catholic, in doubt? Argentine President Javier Milei didn't think Francis was much of a Catholic, which is where Francis came from. He derided him as a communist and even said that the representative of the evil one on earth is this man. And yeah, the interpretation of divine revelation came into question under Pope Francis. Multiple foundational questions by senior Vatican, like in the bishops group and others, asked the Pope to please clarify his positions on these very foundational things. Repentance as a necessary condition for sacramental absolution. And as I mentioned before, the interpretation of divine revelation. I mean, these are like, you got to believe this stuff. I mean, you're not a Christian if you don't believe it. Because, I mean, what's the point of the death of Christ and the resurrection if you don't believe in absolution and the foundational centricity of Christ in the church? And as Robert writes, he goes, the Pope's answers weren't even the most important aspect of this affair. It was the fact that everybody had to ask him because he didn't make any sense. So anyway, you've watched this, and I've seen other interviews you've done, and I've read some of your book, not all of it, but I look forward to finishing it. And I wonder what you thought of this Pope. And also, now that you know what you know, why did Pope Benedict leave under a cloud of intrigue? Does one answer the other? Well,
Those are really good questions. And fortunately, they're all answered in my book. There's been a long association with the CIA and the Vatican. And I've dug into it a little bit. It's not all in my book. I've written some stuff in my Substack. But post-World War II, one of the senior CIA guys, a guy named Angleton, was stationed in Rome, James Angleton. Well, he started working with the guy who was then the Secretary of State for the Vatican, a guy named Montini. He became Pope Paul VI. Pope Paul VI is a guy who furthered the career of Theodore McCarrick. And there's information...
Pedophile priest.
pedophile priest who became a pedophile cardinal, but a very influential guy in Washington, especially with political circles. And I think he was influential because as he rose up through the ranks, he was backed by the CIA. And politicians in Washington, like Joe Biden, knew it. Biden started in the Senate in 1972. He probably would have watched McCarrick move up or helped him. In the 1990s, McCarrick started working for the State Department. He went to China. He went to Iran. He went to these sensitive areas where he was potentially gathering intel for the CIA. So then in 2008, Obama comes in. Biden's his vice president. McCarrick's this cardinal who's poised to be this mover and shaker in Washington, but they don't like Benedict because Benedict is conservative and he's not a fan of McCarrick. And they start to move against Benedict behind the scenes. What I have in my book is in October of 2012, September of 2012, so the election is just weeks away, a very significant operative for Joe Biden named Dennis McDonough gives a speech at Catholic University about Obama's background in the Catholic Church. McDonough has been having meetings one-on-one with McCarrick for years. And within a month of this meeting, of this speech, and McCarrick is the guy that introduces McDonough to this group of high-profile Catholics. Within a month, McCarrick goes to Argentina. And then a couple of weeks later, he goes back to Argentina, where Bergoglio is. And there's been a big tracing of McCarrick's career put out by the Vatican after he was revealed to be this pedophile cardinal. They called it the Report on Theodore McCarrick. And they kind of document his travels. And they document these two trips they took to Argentina at this very sensitive time because Benedict then resigns his post in the middle of February of 2013. So only a few weeks after McCarrick has gone down Argentina twice within the several months, does Benedict leave. And what happened in the Vatican report on McCarrick, and that was managed by this guy, Cardinal Parolin. He's one of the leading contenders to be the next pope. He was the Secretary of State for Francis. So it's basically a cover story. They don't say who McCarrick met with when he went down to Argentina. They just sort of list that he went there, and that's all they do. So to me, it's a cover story that McCarrick was down in Argentina. He manipulates, then he comes
up
back.
Pope Francis.
Meeting with
Bergoglio.
potentially meeting with Pope Francis. It's not clear. Vatican hasn't clarified who he met with. And then he comes back as Benedict retires in Rome. Who's there? McCarrick. And he starts influencing the conclave to bring his friend Bergoglio. That's how it's set up.
And it was because the end game was globalism. Now, there are some people who listen to this so far and say, well, that's ridiculous. Of course, nobody at the Vatican was a CIA plant or an asset. Have you not been paying attention? I mean, or a USAID plant. I mean, there's a lot of espionage going on, as we learned from our former interview with our CIA guy. There was a lot of espionage going on at USAID, and for which people were repaid handsomely. But the idea was globalism. Talk a little bit about that and why Francis or Benedict was not the guy they wanted, because he thought there should be borders and sovereignty.
Well, we're getting into some theology here, but it goes back to the CIA. And what I found is because they just started releasing all these Kennedy files. And one of the aspects of releasing the Kennedy files was this guy Angleton, who was a spy master for the CIA. He was interviewed under oath in the Senate twice in the 70s. And this is where he admitted, I worked closely with this guy, Vatican Secretary of State Montini, who became Pope Paul VI. What they did was set the CIA and the Vatican in a close association. And so that Pope Paul VI also did this sort of liberalization of the church called Vatican II. That's what Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict were sort of reacting to. They're saying, you know what? There's been a lot of liberalization of church theology out of Vatican II. We want to sort of restrict that, go back to a way earlier than that. Well, that's when they brought in Bergoglio, Pope Francis, and he became even more liberal. So he's become this ultra liberal pope, and frankly, like you say, he's a globalist. He was what I call the morality launderer for the Obama administration. They morality laundered free for all and illegal immigration around the world. A lot of it in the southern border of America, but also through Europe. They morality laundered the betrayal of the Catholic Church in China to the Communist Party, Chinese Communist Party. They morality laundered the disastrous Obama-Biden nuclear deal with Iran. So they did all this directly. I mean, he was directly working with Obama. And so that's all in the book. The details are in the book.
Now, of course, we know in the past that some spooks from somewhere definitely were in the Vatican's pocket somewhere. They were being helped by the CIA or somewhat because of what we know of the Vatican Bank, right? Where they came in, there was a lot of money laundering going on at the Vatican Bank. There was, and a lot of work with the mob, the La Cosa Nostra. And so that
was set up. That was, there's been reporting that was set up with Angleton and this guy Montini, who became Pope Paul VI. Yeah. That was set up in the late 40s after World War II.
And they thought they were doing the right thing, I guess.
Well, back then, the big fear back then, this is Cold War era, so it was, we got to get rid of the Soviets, and we have to get communists out of Italy. They had to defend, that's what a big part of what the CIA was doing with the Vatican was getting the communist influence out of Italy. And so they gave a bunch of money to the Vatican to support Italian elections in the late 40s. And it worked. And the Italian communist state out, generally out of the election. And that's where the mafia was also used to keep the Communist Party at bay from rising through the ranks in Italy.
Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of intrigue there. There was no question but that the Vatican was willing to work with dirty partners in order to further its own agenda. And they needed money. And, you can't, as one person, I put it in a documentary I recently watched about this, was you couldn't actually buy food with a Caravalo? You can't buy food with the gilt piece of pottery in the Vatican. You just can't. And so this was something that the Vatican was willing to do. They were willing to, shade a little bit here and shade a little bit there. So the willingness to work with the CIA or whomever, whatever spy network they were asked to participate in or listen into, that was de rigueur, I think. But when you're talking about trying to stifle an elected pope who is then cast aside and becomes, or Benedict was only the second pope who ever quit, right?
Right.
So, this is of history-making proportions. And then we get this guy, the Barack Obama of the papacy, as Robert Spencer put it, and all of a sudden, I will just say this. We have the bank. They're willing to work with these people. Then we have the John Paul II, who's willing to use Vatican funds and help to further the cause of freedom in Poland, right? And he was working with all the world spooks. So the Vatican had done this before, and now it's 2012, 2014, and here we are again. And now they're going to go, well, we're going to take it another step further. And the step further is to go global and borders and the individual populations and ethnic groups and all of that and become what were they hoping to achieve here?
So you're right. You're on the right track. So, but what happens is, what's really interesting, Donald Trump gets elected president in 2016. And what did Pope Francis do when Donald Trump was running to be president? He personally opposed him. He, on behalf of Obama, Biden, and the globalists, he traveled to Mexico and did an event at the border in Juarez, Mexico. And he did this thing where he's like pointing at the border and the border guards and saying, we have to build bridges, not walls. And then on the flight back to the Vatican, one of the Vatican journalists on the flight goes, well, what do you think of Donald Trump building this? His candidacy is about building a wall along the border. And the Pope he goes, I don't know who this American businessman is, but if he's building walls, not bridges, he's not a good Christian. That's a direct attack against a candidate by a pope. He's not a pope. He's a political operative. That's what Obama wanted. That's what he did. Fast forward. So, but Trump gets elected. Fast forward 4 years. So you said an unprecedented historical thing happened in 2013 when Benedict retired from the papacy. It was like 600 years it hadn't happened. Another historical thing happened in 2020. Pope Francis shut down the church because of a pandemic in March of 2020. It hadn't happened for 500 years.
Yes.
And he did it at the request of the Obama-Biden fake Plandemic plan. And he got out there and talked from St. Peter's Square to an empty square and said, you have to stay home. We're going to shut all Catholic services down until the thing abates. It's a storm. Be careful of the storm. Well, it was a lie. It wasn't a storm. He was lying to his people, and he sent them home. And a lot of them haven't come back. It was the most destructive thing that anybody could have done to the church, and it was unimaginable, except he did it. They all did it. hadn't happened for 500 years.
He lent credence to separating from each other because of a pandemic, which everybody is afraid of it. It started in Italy, that we can tell. I mean, we had stuff on the west coast of the United States and Washington State, sort of the same thing. And a lot of Chinese people in both places, by the way, and they were allowed to travel from China into these places, and maybe they were sick, and who knows. But so what did Obama talk about the Obama connection with the, as you call it, Plandemic? Because there are some connections. You say, well, he wasn't even president. Yeah, well, right. Guess what? I mean, the laptop tells a little story about that as well. Talk about that.
Well, that's where Joe Biden comes in. So Joe Biden had to be the president of 2020. He had set up a fake Plandemic. They started this in 2014, and what's in the laptop is a company called Metabiota that Hunter Biden invested in and Joe Biden invested in. Metabiota was setting up the biolabs in Ukraine. They were involved in the Ebola crisis in Africa. And as a result of those two things, they came out with this need to have global pandemic surveillance and an Ebola czar in 2014. That was Ron Klain, one of Joe Biden's top operatives. Ron Klain became chief of staff after the stolen 2020 election, White House chief of staff. That was his dream job. So he sets up this pandemic, and they roll this thing out. It starts in 2014 in November. Obama goes to meet Xi in Beijing. I was on that trip with the White House. They make an agreement for sharing information on infectious diseases. That's what they started working with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. They funded it through USAID. They gave it $200 billion.
Was it USAID or was it the other one?
USAID got this funding, $200 billion for something called Predict2 that started in November of 2014. And what happened was it was a 5-year funding cycle. Well, Trump comes in and he says, I'm not funding stupid stuff. This global surveillance is expensive and it's not necessary. I'm not funding it. That funding ran out in September of 2019. That's exactly when they released. And I think they released it. They released the virus that they created in their gain of function research in Wuhan. They released it in China. They released it at the World Military Games in Wuhan. It started traveling around the world. It was already out there and also another thing that happened in 2019, right in September, a movie came out called The Two Popes. It was a fictional account of how the resignation of Benedict came about with the help of a benevolent actor who portrayed Francis. So we had these two famous Hollywood actors. Jonathan Pryce was the actor who portrayed Francis, and Sir Anthony Hopkins was the guy who portrayed Pope Benedict. And they had this fake thing. Well, it gets not Oscar nominations. The Oscars are held in February of 2020. The world doesn't really understand the significance of the Wuhan virus then. But they're looking at the Oscars and they see these two popes. A month after is when then they see these two popes and they get this warm, fuzzy feeling that this guy, Francis. A month later, Francis comes out to the empty St. Peter's Square and shuts down the world. It was all part of a CIA operation to move, influence the world opinion to shut down our countries and change the way we vote in America. And that's what got Joe Biden elected.
Interesting. I mean, I don't doubt that it's all connected at all. I mean, that is a big message when the singular Pope stands up in the portico and says, hey, everybody, stay where you are.
Sadly, it's too dangerous. Stay home. And by the way, you're going to have, if you want to vote, do it by mail. Yeah. He didn't say that, but that's what the Democratic Party was moving towards.
Oh, yeah. And then everything became universal mail-out ballots, which changed the results of the election. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yes. As a matter of fact, the minute they start getting rid of universal mail out ballots to people who may or may not still live in the state. I still get California ballots. I do. Yeah, I get ballots from other places, you know. I don't vote them because I know they'll come after me and I'll be in jail, but I get them. And I know other people do too. So they just mail them out, you know, if you've been on the voter records, they send you a ballot, unless you've called them and taken yourself off the list, which I won't do. But anyway, that's happening. People live in bars and they live in, you know, stalls and they live in places with 80 other people, addresses, etc. And our friends that we've talked with about voter integrity have, you know, obviously proven that and in court. And so if you get rid of that kind of balloting, you will get rid of a lot of fake votes. And so, I mean, that's just an aside. You might want to J. Christian Adams. I spoke with J. Christian Adams recently, and you might want to look up, all you listeners and watchers out there, the J. Christian Adams interview I did with him about this very thing. So if you think Victoria is engaging in a conspiracy theory, don't worry, it's real. And it's proven in court, by the way. So that's a nice little aside. So here, you know, God, you've got so many different things, balls in the air in this book.
Right. And we can let's go right to what just happened over the last 2 weeks in Rome. You know, and I wrote about this in my Substack. So J.D. Vance goes to the Vatican. Okay. That's really significant, right?
Tell me about the significance of that, because of course, right after that, you saw the memes. You're like, who else should J.D. Vance visit?
Right. But so this is what happened. So J.D. Vance goes to the Vatican, but you know, my background in the White House, it takes at least a month to plan a vice presidential trip. So they said this is what was it, April 15th-ish, April 20th, he was there. So you go back in time a month, at least a month is when they started planning it, maybe longer. And they set it for Easter. I've been in the White House for a while. I've seen a lot of popes come into the White House. I've seen, and I went with Biden to the Vatican in 2016. They go to the Vatican regularly, but they never go there on Easter. This J.D. Vance trip was Easter. That's the biggest weekend of the year for the Vatican.
It's the high holy day of Christendom.
That's right. And Trump said, I'm sending J.D. Vance. I'm sending my Catholic vice president to talk to you. After he cut off all their funding. He cut off all their funding in early February and said, we're going to send J.D. Vance over there on Easter. J.D. Vance goes over there. As they're planning this trip, that's when McCarrick dies. He gets over there, he talks to Parolin, and the next day he talks to Pope Francis just for a few minutes, and Pope Francis dies the next day. And J.D. Vance goes on in India. Within a week, Trump comes to the Vatican. What does Trump do? Trump's there for just a little bit of time. He has a significant meeting with Zelensky there. But I think what Trump did, so they've taken the money away from the Vatican. There's no National Institute of Health grants going to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. There's Trump and Zelensky. They didn't have a lot of time there. Trump pulls off, it was a come to Jesus moment with Trump and Zelensky in the Vatican, in the church that Jesus built, because they have to stop this war in Ukraine. And who helped start that war? Joe Biden. And who's at the Vatican for this funeral? Feeble Joe Biden. So the irony about all this is incredible. But Trump goes there, and I think what he did when he was there was he sent J.D. Vance there saying, you're not getting any more money from us, and we're done funding this free-for-all of immigration around the world. And I think what you're going to see is Trump went there, and I think he spoke to a lot of world leaders and said, look, I've got trade deals to work on. If you guys want trade deals with the United States, you got to think about telling and influencing the cardinals that are going into this conclave next week to vote for restrictive immigration policies. We're not having free-for-all refugee backing from the Vatican. We want an anti-illegal immigration Vatican. And I think that's what they're going to get. There's a couple people that are like that. One guy's from Hungary. His name is Peter Erdo, Cardinal Peter Erdo. His Hungary is run by Viktor Orban, who's a close associate of both Trump and Prime Minister Meloni of Italy. Italy has a big say in sort of the background of the Vatican. Prime Minister Meloni and Orban they met at this funeral. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and I think it's moving towards a conservative pope. I hope and pray. This guy Parolin, who's in the lead, is an evil man. He's done terrible things in support of Francis and McCarrick.
Didn't he hide a bunch of pedophile priests?
He did that, and he's the one that the Chinese Cardinal Zen, pointed to as being the guy who betrayed us. It wasn't really Francis who betrayed us. It was Cardinal Parolin. So, and Cardinal Zen is there. He's not voting, but he's there to talk to people. I think they're going to have a world accord of we're cleaning out the Vatican. I think it started today. There was a news report I saw. There's a Cardinal Bessieux who was a very close friend of Francis. He's resigned from being part of the conclave. He stepped away from it today.
Really?
So this guy, yeah. And he was arrested for doing criminal activity with Vatican finances.
Oh.
Right. So to me, it seems like they're backing off. They're backing away from these guys, these cardinals that'll be, pro Bergoglio and keep doing this terrible stuff that the Vatican's been doing for the last 12 years. So that's what I hope.
And, this part of this whole thing that has happened and what Mike's referring to is the fact that there was this Syrian refugee emergency, which was prompted by attacking Syria, which Obama did. And that caused a huge bunch of, thousands upon thousands and thousands of people to go into Europe. And then that caused a trigger effect. Everybody loved that. And all the globalists loved that. That's just great, which is a reason why Joe Biden opened up the United States borders. For whatever reason, it was all part and parcel of the same hive mind of these leftists, these globalists, to welcome in, be a welcoming place, which is great if you don't have to, I suppose, be nice, but can we please at least allow people to come and figure out what our country's all about before just slamming us, like, just coming in and failing to note the customs and other things that we do in the United States of America? That'd be very nice, actually. So that's an issue. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It was a really good conversation. You really dig into the theology behind it. And, this is a real serious time for the church. So this book has a lot to do with it,
mm-hmm.
and the Substack does, and your podcast is right on the cutting edge of it.
Well, it's great to spend some time with you. Appreciate it. Mike McCormick and his book, An Almost Insurmountable Evil, How Obama's Deep State Defiled the Catholic Church and Executed the Wuhan Plandemic. Thanks again. I appreciate you coming on. Take care.
Thanks, Victoria.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Adult in the Room podcast. To keep the programs you like to listen to, please rate this podcast with a fantastic 5 stars on your Apple Podcast app every time you listen. And give me a great review. Plus, of course, subscribe to the podcast. It makes a difference with the big tech algorithm and the big tech oligarchs, and it makes us easier to find. Please get in touch with me on all the big tech stuff. Yeah, we're still there. Using the names Victoria Taft or the Adult in the Room podcast on MeWe, Parler, Minds, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks to 1A Cast for imaging, editing, and production. The fantastic song is Gospel by the March 4th Band of Portland, Oregon. Music for Antifa versus Mike Strickland is Ride or Die by Raps by RC. The Adult in the Room podcast is also a production of Flamingo Road Studios. Remember, head up, heart out, and strive to be the adult in the room. Till next time. Mischief Managed.